Medieval battles were fast, brutal, and fought at arm's length, where a single strike could decide life or death. In that world, chainmail became one of the most important defenses ever created. Made from thousands of interlocked metal rings, it allowed soldiers to move, fight, and survive attacks that would otherwise be fatal. Chainmail didn't make warriors invincible, but it changed the odds, turning deadly blows into survivable injuries and giving medieval soldiers a real chance to walk away from the battlefield alive. Number 1. What chainmail really was and why it mattered. Chainmail was one of the most important defensive technologies ever developed in medieval Europe, not because it made soldiers invincible, but because it dramatically changed how long they could survive in combat. In the Middle Ages, warfare was brutal, personal, and unforgiving. Battles were fought at close range, often lasting for hours, where even a small mistake could mean death. Medical treatment was primitive, infections were common, and a single deep wound could be fatal days later. Chainmail did not eliminate danger, but it significantly reduced the number of life-ending injuries soldiers suffered on the battlefield. At its core, chainmail was a flexible armor made from thousands, sometimes tens of thousands, of small metal rings linked together in a repeating pattern. These rings were usually iron in early medieval Europe, later sometimes steel, and they were assembled by hand. The most important detail was how the rings were closed. High-quality mail used riveted rings, where each ring was closed with a tiny metal rivet. This prevented the ring from pulling open when struck. Cheaper mail used butted rings, which were simply bent shut. In combat, butted rings could split apart under force, while riveted rings held together far better. Medieval warriors understood this difference very well. A soldier wearing poor quality mail might look protected, but could still die quickly. A soldier wearing well-made riveted mail had a real chance to survive repeated blows. Chain mail mattered because it solved a key problem medieval armies faced: how to protect the human body while still allowing movement. Early medieval warfare required the soldiers to walk long distances, climb walls during sieges, fight on uneven ground, and mount or dismount horses quickly. Solid armor plates were rare and expensive early on, and they restricted movement. Mail, on the other hand, moved with the body. It bent at the shoulders, elbows, hips, and knees. A knight wearing mail could swing a sword, raise a shield, run, fall, and stand back up without being trapped inside rigid metal. Before chainmail became common, protection was limited. Shields offered good defense, but only from one direction at a time. Leather armor and thick clothing helped against light cuts, but failed against serious weapons. Once chainmail spread across Europe, it changed battlefield survival. Soldiers protected by mail were less likely to suffer deep cuts to the chest, abdomen, or shoulders. This meant fewer instant deaths and more soldiers remaining combat effective. Over time, this influenced tactics, training, and even social structures. Professional warriors, especially knights and men-at-arms, became more common because armor allowed experienced fighters to survive long enough to become truly skilled. Chainmail also became a symbol of status and professionalism. Creating a full mail hauberk required months of skilled labor. Each ring had to be shaped, closed, riveted, and assembled correctly. This made mail expensive. Owning good mail usually meant the soldier had wealth, training, or a powerful sponsor. On the battlefield, this mattered. Well-armored soldiers often had higher morale and confidence. Enemies could see who was protected and who was not, which influenced fear, hesitation, and decision-making in combat. Chainmail did not just protect the body. It shaped the psychology of medieval warfare. Number 2. How chainmail stopped swords and cutting attacks. Most medieval weapons were designed to cut. Swords, axes, falchions, and large knives dominated European battlefields for centuries. These weapons relied on sharp edges and momentum to slice through flesh. Chainmail worked because it directly interfered with this cutting process. A blade cuts best when it hits a smooth, solid surface and maintains contact along its edge. Chainmail offered the opposite. When a sword struck mail, it hit a moving surface made of many small rings. The blade rarely met a single point of resistance. Instead, The force of the blow was spread across multiple rings at once. This spreading of force was critical. Even a strong swing lost effectiveness when its energy was divided. In many cases, the sword would slide along the surface of the mail instead of biting deeply. The rings shifted, absorbed energy, and redirected the blade's movement. This often turned a lethal strike into a glancing blow. Even when a blade damaged or broke a few rings, the cut usually lost enough force to prevent a deep wound. Instead of opening the body, the attack resulted in bruising, shallow cuts, or blunt trauma. Under the mail, medieval soldiers wore padded garments, commonly known as gambesons or arming coats. These thick layers of linen or wool were essential. The padding absorbed shock, reduced the force transmitted through the mail, and prevented broken rings from being driven into the skin. Without padding, mail alone could still cause injury from blunt impact. Together, mail and padding formed a layered defense system. Mail stopped the blade. Padding absorbed the impact. This combination was one of the most effective protective systems of the Middle Ages. This mattered because medieval battles involved repeated strikes. Combat was not about landing one perfect blow. Soldiers hacked, pushed, and struck again and again in close quarters. Chainmail allowed a fighter to take multiple hits and remain standing. Without mail, even a shallow cut could become infected and deadly within days. With mail, many injuries were reduced to survivable levels. This dramatically increased battlefield endurance. Soldiers could fight longer, hold formations, and survive encounters that would have been fatal in earlier periods. Axes and heavy blades were especially dangerous because they delivered both cutting and crushing force. Chainmail could not fully stop blunt force trauma, but it still played a vital role. The rings prevented deep penetration, while the padding reduced internal damage. A heavy axe strike might still break bones or cause severe bruising, but it was less likely to split the body open. In medieval warfare, this difference mattered. A soldier with broken ribs might survive. A soldier with a deep abdominal cut often did not. As chainmail became widespread, weapon designs began to adapt. Blades grew stiffer, points became sharper, and fighting techniques changed. This alone shows how effective mail was. Armor does not force innovation unless it works. Chainmail forced medieval warriors to think differently about how to defeat an armored opponent, proving its value again and again on the battlefield. Number 3. Defense against arrows, spears, and thrusting weapons. Medieval battlefields were not dominated by swords alone. Ranged weapons and thrusting attacks played a massive role in warfare. Arrows, crossbow bolts, spears, lances, and daggers all threatened even experienced warriors. Chainmail offered important, though not perfect, protection against these dangers. Against arrows, mail provided partial defense that often meant the difference between life and death. At long distances, arrows lost energy. When they struck mail at an angle, the rings could catch the arrowhead, slow it down, or deflect it entirely. This frequently turned a fatal hit into a painful but survivable injury. At close range, especially from powerful longbows or crossbows, chainmail could be penetrated. Medieval soldiers understood this limitation. That is why shields, formations, and terrain were essential parts of warfare. Mail was never meant to replace tactics. It was meant to support them. A soldier behind a shield wall, wearing mail, had far greater survival chances than an unarmored fighter standing alone. Even when an arrow penetrated the mail slightly, the padding underneath often reduced the severity of the wound. Spears and thrusting weapons were more dangerous because they focused force onto a single point. A well-aimed thrust could push rings apart or drive them into the body. Even so, chainmail reduced damage. Instead of clean penetration, the spear might glance off, slide along the surface, or penetrate only shallowly. This could prevent instant death and give the soldier time to react, retreat, or continue fighting. Daggers designed specifically to slip between rings became more common later in the Middle Ages, which again shows how effective mail was. Weapons evolved to defeat it because it worked. Chainmail was especially important in cavalry combat. Knights charging with lances faced enemy spears, pikes, and other lances. The impact forces were extreme. Mail protected the torso, shoulders, and arms during these violent collisions. While it could not fully stop the force of a lance, it often prevented deep penetration. Combined with helmets and shields, mail formed a complete defensive system suited to mounted warfare. In sieges, skirmishes, and open-field battles, chainmail consistently increased survival odds. It reduced the number of instantly fatal wounds and allowed soldiers to stay combat effective longer. In an era where medical care was limited and infection was deadly, this protection was invaluable. Chainmail did not make medieval soldiers fearless, but it gave them a fighting chance. That is why it became one of the most important defensive technologies of medieval warfare and remained in use for centuries. Number 4. Comfort, endurance, and the reality of wearing mail. Modern people often imagine medieval chainmail as unbearably heavy, stiff, and exhausting, but this image is largely shaped by movies rather than historical reality. In practice, chainmail was demanding, but it was designed around the physical limits of trained soldiers. A typical mail hauberk weighed roughly 10 to 15 kilograms, sometimes slightly more depending on length and thickness. What mattered most was not just the weight itself, but how that weight was distributed. Unlike a heavy weapon that strained one arm or a shield that tired the shoulder, mail rested across the entire upper body. The weight spread over the shoulders, chest, and back, reducing localized fatigue. For soldiers trained from a young age, especially knights, this became part of their normal physical condition. Medieval warriors did not put on armor only when battle started. They lived with it. Knights trained in mail, rode in mail, and sometimes even slept in it during campaigns. Their muscles adapted over time. This conditioning allowed them to move more naturally than modern reenactors or casual wearers might expect. Mail did not lock the body into rigid shapes. It flexed at the joints, flowed with movement, and allowed a full range of motion. A soldier could run, kneel, climb ladders during sieges, or fight in tight formations without being trapped inside solid metal. This flexibility was one of mail's greatest strengths, and one of the reasons it remained popular even after plate armor appeared. Ventilation was another overlooked advantage. Chainmail allowed air to pass freely through the rings. During long marches or extended battles, this helped prevent overheating. Plate armor, while stronger in some ways, trapped heat far more effectively. In hot weather, or during intense exertion, overheating could become just as dangerous as enemy weapons. Mail reduced that risk. Sweat could evaporate, and heat escaped more easily, allowing soldiers to maintain endurance for longer periods. This mattered in medieval warfare, where battles were not always quick or decisive. Some engagements lasted hours, and fatigue could decide the outcome as much as skill or numbers. That said, chainmail was not comfortable by modern standards. Rust was a constant enemy. Moisture from sweat and rain caused corrosion, and rusted rings could scratch or irritate the skin. Rings could pinch hair or skin, especially around the neck and under the arms. The constant pressure on the shoulders caused soreness over time. Yet medieval soldiers accepted these discomforts because the alternative was far worse. Comfort was secondary to survival. Mail allowed soldiers to keep fighting after taking blows that would otherwise end their lives. It allowed them to stay standing, hold formation, and remain effective even when exhausted. In the brutal reality of medieval warfare, endurance was survival, and chainmail delivered exactly that. Number 5, maintenance, status, and why good mail was expensive. Chainmail was not cheap, and this fact alone explains much about medieval society and warfare. Creating a single high-quality hauberk required tens of thousands of individual rings. Each ring had to be formed, closed, and often riveted by hand. Blacksmiths first drew wire from iron or steel, cut it into uniform lengths, bent each piece into a ring, punched holes for rivets, inserted rivets, and closed them securely. This process took months of skilled labor. Because of this, good mail was expensive and relatively rare. Poor quality mail existed, but experienced soldiers could tell the difference immediately by feel, weight, and flexibility. Maintenance was a daily reality for anyone who owned mail. Rust prevention alone required constant attention. Soldiers oiled their armor, cleaned it after rain or combat, and inspected it for damaged rings. Broken or stretched rings had to be replaced quickly because one weak point could spread damage across a wider area. Unlike modern equipment, medieval armor had no factories or spare parts. Everything was repaired by hand. Soldiers often carried small tools or spare rings during campaigns. Knowing how to maintain mail was part of being a professional warrior. This constant care created a strong bond between the soldier and his armor. Mail was not disposable. It was often passed down, inherited, or reused for decades. Over time, it adapted to the wearer's body. Adjustments were made to fit better, sit more comfortably, or protect specific areas more effectively. This personalized nature of armor increased its effectiveness and value. A well-maintained hauberk could outlast its owner. Because of its cost and labor, chainmail became a clear marker of status. A soldier wearing well-made mail was visibly wealthier and more experienced. Knights, men-at-arms, and elite infantry often stood out on the battlefield because of their armor. This had real psychological effects. Facing enemies covered in gleaming mail could intimidate less equipped troops. It signaled discipline, training, and resources. Armor influenced morale long before swords ever clashed. Soldiers protected by good mail were more confident, more willing to advance, and more likely to hold their ground. In medieval warfare, morale often decided battles, and chainmail played a direct role in shaping it. Mail also reflected broader social structures. Only those with wealth, noble backing, or professional military roles could afford it. This reinforced the divide between trained warriors and poorly equipped levies. Over time, this helped shape the rise of professional armies, where experience and equipment mattered as much as raw numbers. Chainmail was not just protection. It was a symbol of a soldier's place in medieval society. Number 6. Why chainmail stayed relevant for centuries. Chainmail remained in use for centuries because it solved problems no other armor could fully replace. Even as plate armor developed and improved, mail never disappeared. Instead, it adapted. Plate armor was excellent at deflecting heavy blows, but it was rigid. Joints, gaps, and flexible areas remained vulnerable. Chainmail filled these gaps perfectly. It was worn under plates to protect the neck, armpits, elbows, groin, and backs of the knees. This combination of plate and mail created layered defense systems that balanced strength and flexibility. For infantry soldiers who could not afford full plate armor, mail remained the best available protection. It worked in almost every environment: open field battles, sieges, forest skirmishes, and urban combat. It did not require perfect fit to function effectively, unlike plate armor. It could be repaired in the field and adjusted as needed. These practical advantages ensured its continued use even as technology evolved. Mail also adapted to changing threats. As weapons became more specialized, mail designs changed. Rings became smaller, rivets stronger, and vulnerable areas reinforced. In some cases, mail was combined with leather or additional padding to increase resistance against thrusting weapons. These adaptations extended its lifespan well beyond the Middle Ages. Variations of chainmail continued to appear in early modern warfare, and even influenced later protective designs. The core principle behind chainmail never changed: interlinked metal rings that spread force, resist cuts, and reduce penetration. This principle proved timeless. In a world where medical care was limited, and even small wounds could be fatal, reducing injury severity was often enough to save lives. Chainmail did exactly that. It turned deadly attacks into survivable injuries and allowed soldiers to walk away from battles that would otherwise kill them. This is why chainmail earned its place in history. It was not perfect, but it was reliable. It did not promise safety, but it delivered survival. In the violent, unpredictable world of medieval warfare, that reliability mattered more than anything else.